the first thing that I started writing was Katie's monologue, the monologue that Carrie Coon that, says the page and a half of dialogue. And there was a certain rhythm that I was chasing, like a certain kind of staccato rhythm that I knew that not only did I want people to kind of the film to begin with, but I also wanted it to be cut to a certain type of rhythm where scenes could, a dialogue could just carry on into the next scene without a breath or a change. And so the only way that I could kind of understand how and many angles that would call to get that kind of rhythm was by kind of like color coding. Okay, this is this shot. This would be this shot, and then I could kind of just see it more like a film, like a music score than anything.
Let's start with this sort of basic question. Where did this original idea come from? Because I know this is not something that you've personally been through, but I know it's something that's sort of been in your heart.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for doing this. Thank you for being here. Personally, well, my parents, both my parents are alive, but I definitely have, my dad's 91, and my mom's not that much younger, and so, and there's health issues, so it was inspired by mostly like fears and hopes than full-on lived experience with my parents. I have, just growing up here in the city, I have gone through losing quite a lot of people since a young age. And so there were things that was definitely, like, in terms of the way that affected time, that I was really curious about and interested in if I could chase that. There's like a way that when when something's going to pass, that it has a shift on time that I felt like I hadn't really experienced through film. And if anything, I wanted to chase that when I first sat down writing this, go like when you go through these stages of not wanting something to happen, then accepting it, and then waiting for it.
So where did the idea to have it be about three very different sisters, when did that come into play?
So my wife and I, who's a producer and my partner and collaborator and everything, we lived in Los Angeles for almost 20 years, moved back here, and then I immediately went straight into learning how to become a caretaker to my parents. And I was going through, when I first came back, like I was going through all these different like kind of periods of being like, oh, I need to get all this paperwork. I got obsessed with getting this DNR. I wanted to run the other way, or I needed to become a peacekeeper. And so it wasn't until like I realized, and I was writing down random notes, and then when I realized like, oh, I could actually separate these different feelings and different approaches that I've been having into characters and actually make them sisters for the same reason, that it could allow me to like see these different feelings, and that was my first jump into it. Like I was able to separate these emotions of myself, and then suddenly they were in conflict with an external conflict.
I read somewhere that it might have been on IndieWire that you color coded the script. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, it's something that I hadn't ever done before. But so when I was like talking about like inspired by writing about time, it also like the first thing that I started writing was Katie's monologue, the monologue that Carrie Coon that says the page and a half of dialogue, and there was a certain rhythm that I was chasing, like a certain kind of staccato rhythm that I knew that not only did I want people to kind of the film to begin with, but I also wanted it to be cut to a certain type of rhythm where scenes could, a dialogue could just carry on into the next scene without a breath or a change. And so the only way that I could kind of understand how and many angles that would call to get that kind of rhythm was by kind of like color coding. Okay, this is this shot. This would be this shot, and then I could kind of just see it more like a film, like a music score than anything. It wasn't so much like trying to be precious, though. This whole film was really one of those things where it was laid out very, very clear to me, and it was just a matter of me trying to be as precise as I could.
One thing that I really want to talk about was the hospice workers that you have in there. Are these based on people that you've actually met? What kind of research did you do? Because we get them for a little bit and they have such rich internal emotional lives that we get a little sample of, which I wasn't expecting, especially when you hear the title is His Three Daughters. You think it's just going to be about the ladies.
Yeah, so I did go through a hospice situation with a close family, friend's family, and very different, except that I found the hospice nurses angels. Like I just couldn't believe that these people existed, and I know that there's like I'm teasing and making fun to a certain degree, but hopefully it's handled in this way that like it's still like I can't like I imagine this angel going to multiple families throughout the day or going off to another family and just what that takes. And so I was really I saw it as a this is a working class film, a working class family. I like this approach of somebody that needed to kind of have distance because he was dealing with a bunch of families, and at the same time, be empathetic, and also like allow himself to be the kind of punching bag that ultimately is what brings Katie and Rachel together. I wrote it for the leads and I wrote it for Giovanna Depo who played Benji, but with Angel, I just had like an image of a face. And so Nicole Arbusto, who's my casting, a director for many films, like all I could really show her was this drawing of a person, and be like, this
a
is who I
sketch
want.
artist.
Yeah. It was odd, but I had like a very like specific person in mind. And it's not like that's who Rudy wound up exactly being, but he like something about like there was something very particular that I was like looking, but I couldn't express, which was the same reason I edited this film. Like I work with great editors, but in this one, like I couldn't express certain things. With this rhythm that I'm talking about, I just felt like if I was left alone in a room, I'd be able to do it better than trying to put it into words.
You kind of slipped something in there that I did want to talk about, which is you did something that anyone who's a writer in the audience you wrote this for your three leads. You wrote this with Carrie and with Natasha and with Lizzie in mind. Please talk about that choice because it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy, and it's definitely nothing I've ever done before. Like with the previous one that I wound up working with Michelle Pfeiffer with, like I wound up, the exercise I've always done is written for actors that are no longer alive. Like that's been the thing. Like so, like that I wrote for Kate Francis or Betty Davis. Like, and then I was like, okay, who could do that? And it was Michelle, right? This one I had worked with Lizzie Olsen on her show. Carrie Coon I knew through Tracy Letts. I worked with Giovanna Depo through Lizzie's show Sorry for Your Loss. And Natasha, I crossed paths enough time that I had her email. So it was one of these things which I was like, well, if I can, like anything that gets me sitting down and writing like feels worth it. So if I'm just gonna have that as a dream, then that was fine. But at least I knew that once that I got to a draft, I knew I could directly go to them. And like again, this whole film has been an exercise in just not thinking like a plan B, just like going like, okay, if anything, I know that all three of them love films, and I'm trying to make this a type of film that used to get made a lot in the 90s, but I felt like they would respond to, where the stakes are high, but they're our stakes.
Who said yes first?
That is a good question, because I sent it simultaneously. I sent it all four scripts simultaneously and told them who I was sending it to simultaneously. And I know that like Lizzie and Carrie both spoke to Jovan before they spoke to me. Like I know the three of them knew each other because Carrie had done Leftovers with Jovan. So I don't know. I mean, the thing is that like, Lizzie was kind of surprised that she doesn't see herself as a Christina. Natasha, I think like the first thing that from what she said is that she's like, oh, I know this character, and do I want to play to type? And then I think that through reading it and through us talking and me saying like, no, we're actually playing with that type. Like let people assume what you're gonna be at the beginning, like the way that the sisters assume, and then we can go someplace else with that. And she was really game for that. Carrie was already like, just because I worked with Tracy Letts twice. I think she was like, the pressure was on immediately for her. So it really was. It felt, they all came back, and then from that point, we just had to figure out a time when everybody was available, and it was pretty soon after that. We're getting ready to shoot in September or October. Then Gilded Age went long, and that was our first test where like Carrie was like, "Look, I think it's gonna be delayed for another couple months, and I'd love for you guys to hang on, but I understand if you need to shoot to cast." And like I went back to everybody, and we were all like, "No, let's just hold on." So the fact that that happened is like our first thing, like really meant quite a lot to me.
Let's talk about casting Jay, because I think for a really long time we all think we're not going to see Vinny, we're not going to see him, and then we get this wonderful character actor who we just love to see. What was the choice in terms of scripting it and then the casting?
Well, scripting wise, it was one of those things where like I had different places that I wanted to hit, but I wrote this, scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. Everything was in order, so it wasn't like storyboarded in that way. Like, okay, so act 3, the father will come out or anything like that. So when I got to that place where all of a sudden they went into the room and then they were coming back with a father, it surprised me. It worried me. It felt like, oh no, like I was breaking a kind of a nice, easy rule. And then that excited me. And then I really felt like not only did I wanted to hear what he had to say, ultimately what he said, it filled a certain hole for me. And I felt concerned in terms of like knowing when you do something like that, go in this direction, that I'm going to lose certain people. But it filled something so kind of primal in me that I just had a hope that it would feel that way for other people as well. And then again, like I didn't have a face for the father, and again, Nicola Busto. Like we wound up seeing quite a lot of different people and sitting down with different actors for the father. I met up with Jay, and was like one of those things which was like, oh yeah, this is really clear. Just hearing his voice, just feeling his presence, and like so much of that scene, it's like it's so much. You have to kind of feel this. The whole idea is like you can feel this weight of this person, and so you can feel the weight of their absence. So you can get a sense of like not only who they are generally to their sisters, but we get something that the sisters don't even get. Some kind of big story, small story, bliss, but big story for him, and personal enough. And like Jay just brought that, and that was like probably the only scene that we shot. We shot this film over 17 days. We shot it in order. That was the only scene that we shot over 2 days, and that was really just like working it out. And by that time, because it was our last day of shooting, really, there was something like very, very specific between the crew and the actors, and then having Jay come in and being the intrusion that he is in the film. And like everybody kind of, their rhythms getting thrown off, but also like surrounding him because it was a new energy.
So you mentioned that you shot over 17 days. I think it's very clear that you did shoot in a real apartment. Oh, yeah. You also rehearsed in this apartment. Please take us through that experience. I mean, it makes such a difference. You feel it, you know it. You can see that this is a real location, but it's a little crazy to say out loud.
Yeah, so when I sent the script to the three leads and to Javon, what I did say was, going to shoot this on film. I'm going to shoot this in order. I'm going to shoot in a real location. I'll have Final Cut, and it'll be our film. Like, we'll be partners in this. Like, I'm not going to be making moves without them. So, like, when I cast Jay, like, they all knew before, and it was a conversation. Or we all also, me and the 3 leads, also we read, like, the top couple angels. So, like, Rudy was a collective decision. But it was a clear one to all of us. The apartment, again, I was writing for a certain apartment that I grew up going to a lot as a kid and through high school, where you could feel the family. in the walls. You could feel the celebrations and the fights that have happened, and just like the warmth, and just like it was a place. Like I had one that I would go to that was really like a second home to me, that I have just like such a particular deep memories with it. But you could always look out the window and see all these other apartments and get the sense that whatever we were going through in that house was happening upstairs and downstairs. And I really wanted that. I wanted this to be, yes, this is a particular family, but this could be happening right next door. And that led me to calling up lots of kids that I grew up with, finding out who was at rent stabilized places still, going to those places. And then ultimately from that, somebody like a girl that I grew up with said, "Oh, you should try this complex on the Lower East Side because they could be really open to it." And they really were. They opened up so many doors. And then just going to that place, and it was a young couple that had just moved in there. It was like all new fixtures, all white walls, but it had that weird wall.
Right. I love that wall. I know that wall.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh, that's a good one. And I felt like even though it was like a young couple that was excited for us to potentially rent it because they were just starting off and the money would be helpful, I felt like I could feel the families before them. And so then I was able to go in with my wife, who does costumes, and work closely with the production designer Kendall and Sam Levy, the cinematographer, and change all the fixtures and get to like really be precise, like in the way that you could do on a soundstage, really like change everything to chasing after a certain type of memory and look, and color coordinate in the way that you could.
And so you go in for 5 days of rehearsal. What was important about that? What was special about that?
A bunch of the rehearsal, I just remember doing like closing my eyes, just hearing them, going through it, and just trying to get the timing of what I needed. And so by that time, Sam and I had met up for like the past 6 months earlier, like really talking about the amount of shots that we needed and how we're going to shoot this, especially because that apartment was so important and such a character. It was really important that we were going to frame things precisely so that you were unveiling the apartment along with the character. So as the sisters were revealing and hopefully becoming more textured and having more depth in the way that we imagine them in the beginning scenes, that we'd also start getting an understanding of like, oh, the kitchen connects to the bathroom this way, and the living room. We'd start getting a layout of the place as well as the family. So the rehearsal had a lot to do with me just like getting a certain type of speed going, and then just getting everybody really comfortable. Like I could show them how I was going to shoot this, and like because we're shooting film, and let them know like this is not normal coverage. I think that was the biggest thing about being in that area, was like nothing's really going to get figured out in the edit room. Like this is going to be this shot. You guys are not going to share a shot until 45 minutes into the film. It was going to be, and they had to be expected to like do the whole thing, like the whole, because some of those scenes are 5 minutes long, but in the room together, but like I'm not going to call cut and then move into a different angle. It's going to be just that angle, this angle.
The decision to shoot on film, what inspired that?
Same, like it forced me to not get sloppy and not think of like having a second camera to make choices beforehand. I knew that it was going to be a limited amount of time that we're going to shoot on, so like how to prepare and just make sure that I'm being really precise. I also knew we weren't going to put a ton of lights in there, and I think to make video look the way that I'd like it to look takes a lot more lights, and film is just like, I mean, this whole thing about shooting in New York City, like there's a light in that place that is so specific to it, and then I felt like, and film could respond to that light. And so as the clouds are shifting and you see the lights changing on Carrie's face or whoever's face it is, it really, like, I think the film absorbs it beautifully, and also connecting it to these movies that I felt like really happened all the time. I try to be in conversations with those movies.
You do something which not everyone is really capable of doing these days in terms of filmmaking. You have a couple of different endings, and they're both equally satisfying. We get a final ending with all the girls together, and then we get another, like the final ending, just with Natasha alone making a little small choice that her sisters would like. Were those always your endings? Was that always what you envisioned how the film was going to end?
Actually, I was just when I was sitting out there, I was like, wow, there's another ending because the song that Rodrigo sings is really so. Rodrigo Morante, who I also sent the script to and asked him to write the music to based on the script, he sent me a draft of that song at the end that I loved immediately, and then I could shoot with it. I could have it in mind. It was Sam's idea to just point that camera out the window in case I was gonna want to do something like that. And I remember being kind of resistant, but then I was like so grateful. But I think there's another. I think there's like multiple endings. Yeah, that definitely was scripted. The thing that wasn't scripted was cutting out of Rachel's face and pulling back into seeing all those buildings. That was something that wasn't in the script, but like we started talking about getting close to shooting, where I was like, oh, it'd be really nice for us to pop out wide enough to get the sense of like, not only to get the fresh air and the space that I felt like we would need after being kind of locked in this room, but also just see all these other windows and think like, oh, they could be the beginning of this stage, or like, this could have happened a year ago in this window and that window.
So the film is now on Netflix.
Yes.
You've been nominated for 2 Gothams. I first saw the film like over a year ago. I'm so happy to share it with people. What does it feel like being able to finally take this out into the world and for people to respond to it?
Well, so I like, for me this is a very personal film, and when I was writing it, like a lot of it had to do with going like, God, this feels so unnatural. What's going on with my parents? Like, and just trying to understand this process of, and this is the best case scenario, parents dying before us. Like that's how it's supposed to be, and nothing about this felt natural. And then here is this thing, filmmaking, that I could do that was joyful and I could control in the way that this experience hasn't. The biggest thing has been like hearing from people afterwards, connecting to it, and that sense of like being alone in this process has gone away from me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you all for
Thank
coming
you.
and staying. What a wonderful audience. Tell everyone, tell all your friends, it's streaming on Netflix now. You can go home and you can watch it again.